No Man's Sky is the newest game from Hello Games, a small independent studio located in the United Kingdom. It's also something of an enigma in the game world when we consider that the studio is so small. The hype that surrounded this game for the past few years seems well out of place, especially when we consider that the hype wasn't necessarily brought about by the developers themselves. Well, not fully anyway. While some of the hype came from statements made by the developers, it seems more of it was spread by word of mouth from people who hadn't even played it yet, as well as the fact that Sony decided to put its own muscle behind the marketing for the PS4 version. And for such a small studio, this is a rare thing indeed. However, I'm here to give a hype-free review of No Man's Sky. I didn't get caught up in the hype train. This doesn't mean I was never interested in the game, but it does mean I was also looking at it for what it could potentially be. A procedurally generated universe with all the pros and cons of procedural generation. The best way to describe No Man's Sky's gameplay-wise is a survival light and crafting light game. Unlike other survival games such as DayZ, Rust, and Ark Survival, No Man's Sky's emphasis on survival is fairly small. Instead of worrying about health, hunger, and hydration, No Man's Sky has a generic life support system that can be mixed with an environmental protection level on certain planets. Both the life support and the environmental protection can be recharged with elements found easily enough on most planets. There is no scavenging for food and water necessary to keep the player alive. Any sort of combat is also extremely limited. On some planets, certain creatures may be hostile towards the player and attack. In space, there may be pirates that can attack. There are also sentry robots that can be found on each planet that may attack if they feel that the player is doing too much damage to the ecosystem. And that's it. The crafting elements are also not as detailed or as necessary for survival as they are in games like Subnautica, and the aforementioned games. Crafting various items are really only done for two reasons. The first is to increase the abilities of the player's exosuit, multi-tool, or starship. However, since each of these has a finite amount of space to slot upgrades, they become less necessary for survival. There is no need or ability at the present to build structures on planets to survive, or to hold various things that have been mined or created. And the second is to literally give you the ability to traverse between star systems. That's it. There is also no multiplayer component, which is a staple in many other survival games. In those games, like the previously mentioned DayZ, Rust, and Ark Survival, it's not just the elements in the world players have to be wary of, it's other players. While the game is set in a shared universe, players can't, as of now, meet up with other players, even if they are on a world discovered by another player, and they get that other player to show up. This was evidenced on the very first day of release when two people streamed them trying to meet up after one of them found another person's planet, contacted that other player, and the two tried to meet up. In this way, No Man's Sky is much more like Stranded Deep or Subnautica, both single-player experiences set with survival and crafting gameplay. However, where No Man's Sky sets itself apart from those games is in just how potentially big it is. The developers at Hello Games have said there are over 18 quintillion procedurally generated planets to visit in No Man's Sky. For anyone wondering, that's 18 followed by 18 zeros. It's a number no one could ever count to in their lifetime. And as such, it's a number that no single person could ever visit in their lifetime either. Even if they had the ability to just jump one star system to another, they'd never be able to do it. It's just that big. This is where No Man's Sky procedural generation comes into play. It's actually impossible for the developers to fully map out such a huge number of planets to explore, so the developers are relying on what is essentially a random number generator to make all these planets, or more aptly, multiple RNGs. Each planet is created by pulling from a list which includes, but is not limited to, what sort of terrain the planet has, the potential flora and fauna of the planet, and what elements are found there. As a result, each planet and visitable moon should be, in theory, completely unique. Unfortunately, procedural generation has its limitations. Since it pulls from a finite list of possibilities, some planets end up feeling very samey, especially those within the same star system. Things like structures tend to be a mishmash of the same buildings used over and over again. This is to be expected of procedural generation, though. Animal life can also have very weird traits, since they are put together from a list of parts: head, body, front and rear legs, possible carapaces, etc. One particularly funny video I've seen shows a trailer with its massive brachiosaur-like creatures, gazelle-like creatures, and a giant rhino-like creature. and then actually showing a creature put together through the procedural generation that looked like something like a mix of a horse, something else I can't identify, and a dinosaur that walked on two legs, even though its, quote, arms had hooves and no digits to manipulate things such as food.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
There can also be odd plant life that can sprout up, though it may be classified as animal life, I'm not sure, that looks like, say, jumping mushrooms. In short, procedural generation has its pros, such as the potential for hugely varying landscape and flora and fauna on each planet discovered, but it also has its cons in these very samey things, appearing over and over again in both natural and created structures, as well as flora and fauna that can honestly make little to no sense. So the gameplay? Well, here's where it gets tricky and where the hype has hurt No Man's Sky. There are two main narrative paths to go down. One is a generic try to find the center of the galaxy you are in path. This path has no real guidance except to discover the materials and blueprints needed to proceed down a path that leads to the center of the galaxy one is in. The other is the Atlas path, a slightly more story-driven path. And by slightly I mean barely there, but more so than following a path that just leads to the center of the galaxy. That brings about questions and some answers into the universe of No Man's Sky. There is a third option that is always available, though, and that's to just go off and explore anywhere the player wants. In short, those looking for a narratively driven game will be disappointed. The very crux of the game, even explained by Hello Games, is exploration. Finding new things, naming them if one wants, and just doing that over and over again. It's what the developers want people to do. Sure, they give the options of going to the center of the galaxy or following the Atlas path, but there is no hand-holding to get players to do this. If they want to just go wherever they want, whenever they want, well, that option is there, and encouraged. Other than that, the gameplay revolves around collecting materials to build items necessary to move from star system to star system, cataloging flora and fauna for in-game currency to buy bigger and better multi-tools and starships, and potentially discovering lore and languages for the 3 races found throughout the galaxy. There is also an inventory management system for both the exosuit and the starship that can get exceedingly annoying early on in the game, at least until the player has found enough drop pods to increase their exosuit capacity and earned enough in-game currency to buy bigger ships, or found better crash starships that they can repair. That's really it, and I think this is where those caught up in the hype got disappointed. They might have been expecting more to do, or a more narratively driven story, or the ability to interact with other players, or whatever. They just didn't expect what was eventually delivered. Now, on the more technical side of things, it's a bit hit or miss. Graphically, the game looks fine. It's not a great looking game, but it certainly isn't horrible to look at either. The various starships look neat, as do the various multi-tools. But like I mentioned earlier, the animal life can be a bit hit or miss. On more rocky planets with little vegetation, an empty, barren feeling is very visible. Also, while flying around a ship on a planet, the procedural generation is very visible on the planet's surface, as well as when on foot and going a certain distance from, say, a large ore deposit, looking back after it has been mined, and it appearing to have respawned, at least until the player gets close enough to see that, no, it's not there. The sound is decent, though nothing spectacular. The music is soothing, if not forgettable. However, the PC version has had many issues since its release. The mouse and keyboard controls are horrendous, especially when flying a ship in the atmosphere of a planet. The menu system was obviously designed with consoles in mind, since it uses a Destiny-like cursor that one has to hold the button on to change things in them. The frame rate is set to 30 frames per second by default. You can change this, though. The frame rate has a tendency to drop for absolutely no reason, in some cases making the game completely unplayable, even if people are using high-end computers and graphics cards. Some people have experienced crashes when booting up the games or just at random times while playing. Alt-tabbing to another window, like a streaming program for example, would prevent getting back into the game unless the option for full-screen windowless was chosen, etc. And No Man's Sky came out at $60 for both the console and PC versions. While Hello Games has released a patch to try and help alleviate some of the problems, including the Alt-Tab problem, there are still issues that need to be addressed. There is little reason that people with GTX 970s, 980s, or equivalent AMD cards, and even the 1070s or 1080s, should be having as many issues with frame rates as they currently do. I currently run a GTX 980 Ti and suffer frame rate drops at random, and one time it persisted so bad that I had to quit the game because it was moving so slow all the time. My final verdict for No Man's Sky is a tough one. Until the PC version is fixed, there's very little to encourage people to buy it at full price, though I can't speak for the PS4 version. It's also a game where players really need to know what they're getting into when they go for it. It's an exploration game first and foremost, and the gameplay is extremely repetitive almost from the get-go. There's very little narrative to No Man's Sky as well. In short, I can't honestly recommend No Man's Sky to a lot of people. It takes a certain kind of player to enjoy it for what it is, and to continually play it. I'd seriously wait for the price to come down and for the issues to be fixed. No Man's Sky is not a horrible game, for what it wants to be, but it isn't the game many people were hoping for. There is a lot of potential here, and I hope Hello Games works on that potential to help bring much more into the game's universe. But potential alone is not enough to say people should go out and buy it, at least right now. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. If you liked it, please hit the like button. If you didn't, hit the dislike button. Either way, I'm good. Also, if you enjoyed the video and wish to help support in making more, consider visiting my Patreon page located in the description below. And again, thank you very much.